I'd like to introduce Bryan Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Given the constantly evolving trade relationship between Canada and the United States, I thought it would be valuable to hear his perspective on the current state and future outlook of the automotive industry. Bryan, on the trade file, the government has been very vocal about their intention to diversify trade in global markets at the expense of trade with the United States. Of course, diversification is a wise policy to pursue, but is there any scenario where the Canadian auto sector can survive this theoretical diversification without maintaining and strengthening trade with the U.S.?
Yeah, diversification is always an important strategy. You want to make sure you're not dependent on one single customer. When it comes to automotive, though, it's very challenging. This industry is totally integrated with the United States. 90% of the vehicles that are produced in Canada are destined for the US. It simply doesn't make sense to build cars in Canada and send them to Europe or Asia. So diversification is really not an option. We must secure a deal with the US, eliminate tariffs, or the industry simply won't exist at this current size.
Yeah, we're completely on the same page. There's no question there. So the access to the US isn't optional, it's full stop foundational.
It is, and if you look at the history of the automotive industry, companies like Ford and General Motors, Stellantis, they've been building cars in Canada for over 100 years. They've created these supply chains that are completely linked to the United States, and it really started with the Auto Pact in 1965, where we started to remove those barriers and create a supply chain. And now you have a scenario where a part or a component in a Canadian-built vehicle may have crossed the border 7, 8, 9 times before it's finally installed in a vehicle. So we are completely integrated, and there's no way to change that structure.
You're bang on, Bryan. So if we get this wrong, tell me, it's not some abstract policy failure, it means shift cuts, job loss, plants closed, lost investment, and the economic backbone of entire communities taking the hit. So how important is it for the government to balance their diversification strategy with strengthening Canada-US trade? And what are the risks if we don't get this right?
Well, the risks are massive. I mean, this industry is so important to the broader Canadian economy. Auto manufacturing supports about 125,000 direct jobs, over 500,000 when you look at the broader supply chain. Ford, GM, Stellantis, those three companies are the largest employers in the auto industry with over 20,000 direct jobs. So this is a huge footprint that doesn't just impact Ontario, it has implications in jurisdictions across Canada, 1,300 dealerships, 60,000 employees. So we simply cannot diversify away from the US. We have to walk and chew gum at the same time. That means getting a deal with the Americans while trying to diversify some of our other exports where it's feasible.
And there's no question, while critically important, this is just the human element we are talking about here. So we're also seeing very real financial pressures building. My understanding is that roughly $5 billion in potential tariffs is now impacting 5 Canadian auto companies directly. From an industry perspective, is this accurate, and what does this mean for your members?
That is the estimate, that since these US tariffs have been put in place, automakers in Canada have paid approximately $5 billion on the production that they're sending into the United States. If you look at it on a broader basis, manufacturers in North America are expected to pay about $188 billion in tariffs over the next 3 years. So this is just unsustainable. You simply cannot have a productive and commercially viable automotive plant in Canada if you're paying tariff of that level. So this has to get resolved immediately.
I love how direct you are. You say it the way it is. I think this really highlights something that many Canadians are not necessarily aware of. This isn't some nebulous theoretical. These unjustified and unfair tariffs are creating very real, very immediate threats to our auto sector. People are feeling it. Canadians are feeling the hurt. And abroad, we have seen that Mexico continues to operate tightly integrated with the US under CUSMA. So from your lens, what should Canada be doing right now to protect the auto sector?
Well, first and foremost, we must get a deal with the US to remove the 232 tariffs, and we have to renew our CUSMA agreement, the trilateral trade agreement that dictates trade across Canada. It's having a major impact on companies because if you're thinking about making a major investment in Canada right now, and most auto investments, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar investments with 10, 20, 30-year time horizons. If you don't know what the rules of the game are going to be for trade and investment in North America, you're going to hold off on making any sort of major decisions. So we've got to get to the table with the US, and we need to make sure that we're consulting and being consulted closely with government so that we've got the strategy needed to win and get through this.
Exactly. Getting to the table, knowing what the plan is, and moving forward. This is exactly what I've been hearing, regardless of the industry or sector that I've been speaking with. There is frustration from everyone that the government is not updating or engaging the industries that are most affected. Their concerns are falling on deaf ears, sadly, both in DC and in Ottawa, and this is where concern is growing. Historically, during past trade negotiations, there were structured updates and regular Canada-US engagement and roundtables and industry briefing, even opposition consultation. Are we missing that level of coordination today? Like, even the government's own advisory council, a group of eminent Canadians whose goal is to provide sage counsel to our negotiating team, was just re-struck by the Prime Minister after last meeting this past summer. And we only have 9 weeks left until the July 1st CUSMA review deadline.
Yeah, there's no doubt that we're late getting stood up on this and getting a strategy in place. You know, I had the opportunity to be involved in the first negotiation of the CUSMA agreement only 6 years ago. And one of the things that really made Canada effective as a negotiating partner was, well, first of all, we do have some of the best trade negotiators in the world in our public service. And secondly, there was constant engagement with industry so that our positions at the table were extremely well informed. That gives you an advantage in any negotiation. We have to have that type of structure as we go into these discussions with the United States, or we will not succeed in this negotiation. And frankly, the costs are too high for that to even be contemplated.
The costs across the country are significant, there's no question. Something further, I read an article yesterday. It cited a Quebec source claiming that Carney specifically, Prime Minister Carney, specifically told François Legault that delaying negotiations, or as they called it, their slow approach, was deliberate. If this source is accurate, does this concern you at all?
It does. Tariff costs are mounting every single day. It is unsustainable. I've just come back from a few days in Washington, and one thing is very clear to me. Hoping that you can wait out the administration through the midterms or into the next presidential, that is not necessarily going to result in a better negotiating outcome. And in the meantime, the costs are mounting on Canadian industry. So we really can't afford to wait. I'm not suggesting negotiate a bad deal, but let's get to the table and get working on this.
Honestly, all hands on deck is definitely the right approach, because without that, stakeholders start making decisions in isolation, which ultimately runs the risk of not being in tandem with the government's strategy. But we cannot know because the government isn't saying what the strategy is, so there's uncertainty, there's unpredictability. We're in a really tricky spot. And as most people can appreciate, I'm a pretty optimistic person, but this is a tricky case, and the longer this uncertainty continues, the worse it gets. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, certainty is a killer for any business, any employer in this country. And if we don't have clarity on what the strategy is and what the timelines are so that people can plan accordingly, the costs will only mount. And I'm also an optimist. I mean, I ultimately believe there's a deal to be had here because Canada is the biggest market for US auto by far. We have a lot to offer. The US is running a major trade surplus with Canada and auto. So when I look at the fundamentals of this negotiation, I think we're in a great spot. We've got to get moving.
100%. I'm really glad you're here with me today. From a conservative policy perspective, the approach specifically to Canada-US trade, that is to say, in addition to diversification, is fairly clear. Let's protect full access to the US market, strengthen North American competitiveness, lower costs for producers, speed up investment approvals, and ensure regulation is predictable and not constantly shifting. How important is that kind of stability to the sector right now?
Well, it's key. Obviously, getting rid of the tariffs is the most important thing, but there's a lot that we can do right here domestically to strengthen some of our key sectors. And the auto industry is the backbone of our manufacturing sector in this country. You're never going to offset that $5 billion cost, but what you could do is create a better regulatory environment here, so you're actually encouraging investment. Canada is a high-cost jurisdiction, and yet we have all of these policies like a federal EV mandate, which adds costs to companies for no obvious benefit to the country. So that's just one example. I could list off many more, but let's get our own house in order as we go through this negotiation, and that will actually strengthen our hand at the table.
So you mentioned EVs. So allow me to switch gears just for a minute and talk about EVs. It was 12 weeks ago, the federal government announced the repeal of the EV mandate. It is still in place, and emission rules are tightening in ways many in industry view as effectively the same thing under a different label. Why is repealing the EV, from your lens, why is repealing the EV mandate important for your members? And what's the industry impact of this regulatory limbo that the industry is currently in?
Well, first of all, the mandate was very costly to manufacturers. To comply with this regulation, if you weren't able to sell the prescribed number of EVs that the federal government established in this regulation, you then either have to buy credits from competitors, which can cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, or you have to restrict your sale of gas-powered vehicles in this country. Both are very damaging outcomes. On top of it, the regulation is highly duplicative. We already have existing emissions regulations. The federal government then introduced an EV mandate, and that's on top of provincial EV mandates in BC and Quebec. So as we talk about creating one national Canadian economy, making ourselves more competitive, this policy was flying directly in the face of that. So we were happy to see the government say they're going to be repealing it, but that was 3 months ago, and no action has been taken to date. This has to be removed and get that burden off manufacturers.
Spot on. And this is another issue that I have, is that we're seeing a gap between announcement and implementation. This creates uncertainty, and uncertainty undermines investment because decisions are being made in real time, not on timelines mandated by bureaucrats via the OIC or some other regulatory mechanism.
Timing is critical. The Canadian economy is under pressure like we've never seen before. And just to give you an example of how serious this is, the Bank of Canada is estimating that at the end of this year, our GDP is going to be 1.5% slower growing than what they forecast a year ago. And that's because of all of these trade and tariff impacts. So in the face of that, and as we work to negotiate those tariffs away, how do we make the Canadian economy more competitive? How do we make it grow? How do we get rid of redundant regulations? The EV mandate is the perfect example of something that could be eliminated tomorrow and is simply adding cost to companies that build here.
Thank you, Bryan. And my final question, if government could get one thing right in the next few months, what would actually move the needle?
Well, we need certainty as industry. I mean, that is fundamental. Right now, there is so much uncertainty out there because of what the U.S. trade policy is doing. So we need clarity from government on what is the strategy with respect to getting rid of those 232 tariffs and renewing our CUSMA agreement. And then secondly, how are we actually making Canada the most competitive place in the world to build cars? Let's aspire to that. And I think we have a real opportunity in this country to be a bigger player in manufacturing, but it's going to take all hands on deck, and we need to get moving now.
Indeed. Certainty, alignment, decisive action. Because in this sector, from my perspective, delay doesn't pause the impact, it multiplies it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your expertise and your perspective.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you.